right. Hi, everyone. Good day to all our listeners and our subscribers. And we welcome you back again to the show. We're just very excited at this point because we're going to talk about something that a lot of people are very interested in right now. We are going to talk about open education resources and touch on content curation, which I think is very timely at this time of the pandemic when we are, very busy. We're scrambling to prepare for our distance education. And, beside me is one of my newest friends. Actually, I've met, his name is Dr. Ferdinand Pitagan, and I just met him a year ago. And because we shared a lot of interest, and we've been very very close in terms of, well, it started with a project that we're working with a publishing company, and then when you share something, share interest, you continue on discussing, and you strike on a very very good friendship. And I am very happy to have him finally in our show. Right, even before podcast I was already inviting him, but things are, a lot of things are happening right now. Things are crazy, but right now I feel like Dr. Pitagan and his expertise should be something that is, shared in a lot of platform, and I'm very happy that he is with us. So, Dr. Ferdy Pitagan, welcome to Empower Ed Podcast and Empower Ed TV.
Wow, thank you very much, Jim. Good morning, blessed morning to all. Thank you very much for taking time to be with Jim and with me. Today we were going to discuss open educational resource, which is a topic that is very close to my heart.
Yes, and
Yes.
just to introduce Dr. Pitagan, Dr. Pitagan is the Dean of the School of Education at the National Teachers College, and he leads a big number of professors, instructors, and people inside the School of Education. And of course, I think this is one thing that I'm very interested to know more. He has been part of UNESCO. He has led a team in UNESCO, and it still continues to be a consultant, not just in UNESCO, but a lot of education organizations right now. And he has been leading researches, policy making, even training and professional development for teachers, and a lot more. Even to school leaders, both in the basic and in the higher end. In terms of policy making, in terms of policy inception, especially in open education, educational resources, and even universal design, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Uh, 2 years ago, I was involved with the creation of policy in terms of inclusive open educational resource. The Philippines now, 2 weeks ago, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, the Commission on Higher Education has launched the CHED Commons, or the policy, and also the policy on the adaptation of open educational resource. So even before my project began with UNESCO, we have a draft, an emerging draft of the open educational resource in Philippine adaptation by CIMEO, CHED, UPOU, UP College of Education, and TESDA and DepEd. But the project that I'm heading is focusing on inclusive open educational resource. It means to say that you're going to use OER, which is not only open and free, but at the same time has the tenets of the universal design for learning. Say, for example, if we're going to use a PowerPoint, which is an OER, or a presentation, which is an OER, it's good. But what we want that presentation to have accommodation for learners with special need, learners with learning disabilities. There could be closed captioning, there could be a braille component, there could be some, sign language component into that corresponding OER, so that everyone would be inclusive, or inclusive in nature. That's the project that we are espousing, inclusive open educational resource. This project was launched in the Philippines through UNESCO Paris with the backing of funding by the Hewlett Foundation. So we started in the Philippines, we piloted in the Philippines, and then We also began work in Malaysia, and supposedly we would be going to Africa for the African leg of the project, but because of the pandemic, we're still waiting for any updates.
Wonderful project, Dr. Pitagan. I think that's a
Mm-mm.
very, a global project, and I love
Mm-mm.
that it touches an aspect of education that we don't usually talk much in the
Mm-mm.
mainstream, which is inclusive education. We will
Mm-mm.
touch on that. Let's start first with the most basic questions. A lot of, I think the buzzword really is OER,
Mm-mm.
right? Both in depth ed, in higher ed, we now have the idea of
Mm-mm.
commons.
Mm-mm.
I do remember that even in our cluster in the Jesuit schools in the Philippines, we have what we call as the Magis Learning Commons.
Mm-mm.
Um, and all of this are anchored on the idea of open educational
Mm-mm.
resources. Could you explain to
Mm-mm.
us, in a basic sense, what OERs are and maybe give us some examples to clarify
Okay.
these things out?
Okay. OER is defined as open. When we say open, it's free. Okay. Educational resources. When we talk of educational resources, this encompass the whole gamut of materials that our teachers and learners would use. This could be textbooks, this could be research materials, this could be multimedia content, this could be audio books, podcasts, etc. So it means to say that an OER is providing high quality teaching and learning materials that would allow teachers and students, even institutions, free of use, adaptation, and distribution. Means to say that an OER is free and you could easily use it for educational purposes. Say, for example, if we're going a simple PowerPoint presentation, I always go back to that because most of the teachers are using that. If we're going to use a visual image, we're going to go to Google and get maybe the most beautiful, enriching, and content. But are we sure that that visual is an OER? That visual is free. That that we are not committing plagiarism or even copyright infringement. OER now is making sure that the materials that we're using for educational purposes are free. It may reside on the public domain or in some type of licenses. So it's making sure that everyone would get free access to academic resources, maybe research journal, books, softwares, or so that everyone would be inclusive, everyone would be included in the educational process. So OER is also in the tenets of inclusive education, more so now that we are espousing the universal design for learning so that no one would be left behind. You just imagine a very, very good resource that the teacher would die just to, use it inside the classroom, but it is copyrighted. Diba?
Yes,
So the
yes.
teachers would have to pay, the students would have to pay. And if you're in the public school, I think it would pose a very big problem. But if it's an OER, if it's a free educational resource, then you could freely use it for academic purposes. Your students and you would have free access to that material. So that's the basic tenets of OER. And since the beginning of the pandemic, 185 countries have shut down schools, and many of them now are looking into the possibility of opening a portal for open educational resource. I think the Philippines as an example, James, sabi mo yung example. An example of that would be the DepEd Commons. If you go to DepEd Commons, all you need to do is to log in and get resources that you want to, integrate into your lesson activities. You don't need to, be mindful of attribution, of licenses, of copyright, because they are free. UPOU also have a UPOU Commons where you could get materials, multimedia, videos, etc., etc., and that you could also use for for your lessons. So OER has been in the Philippines. It's just that because of the pandemic, we are now, pushing the use of it. It is now highlighted as one of the mainstream solution for the pandemic to continue education. And I think it's a very, very good move by both DepEd and CHED to consolidate, materials for basic education and for higher education. Because in most European countries and even in progressive countries, they have a national OER repository.
Dr. Pitagan, I'm very interested with what you've said about, access to free education resources. And I think this is what open education resources are for. And when you also added another layer of what it means to have an open education. I think the accessibility, not just because it's free, but it's accessible for all kinds of learners, various contexts. Of course, right now we're not yet fully on that added layer, the inclusivity, but we are. I think we are more. I think this has been also the main agenda, which is to provide access in terms of regardless of the socioeconomic status of every learner. I think that's the first kind idea of open education that we are into right now. Very interestingly, you pointed out about free, right? Open education resources are free materials. Um, how do we compare this with public domain materials and licensing um, management or like Creative Commons?
Ah, um, the difference with an OER is an OER. It's an open education resource. It means that it's free. It could reside in the public domain or any other Creative Commons licensing. So in open license, such as in the public domain, there's no one who would claim the ownership. So in essence, OER that are in the public domain are the purest OER because no one owns it, so everyone could use it. But if it's say for example in licenses of creative domains, there are terms of licensing and attribution. So say for example, you heard of CCBY, CCNC. So these are the different types of terms in which you could use that corresponding open educational resource. You could either retain the OER, reuse, revise, remix, or redistribute the corresponding resource. So OER that resides on the public domain are the purest type of OER because no one would claim copyright, no one would claim ownership, so everyone could use it. While if it's licensed by, say for example, as you say, creative domains, there should be some some forms of licenses and attribution, referencing of the corresponding ownership. But still, the operative word here is free. Both of them are free for utilization in the educational domain. Yes.
Dr. Pitagan, I think that's a wonderful clarification
Mm-mm.
because, a lot of teachers are scared that they might be
Mm.
doing a copyright infringement, but
Mm-mm.
it's important to know that there are free materials. I think that's the word
Mm-mm.
there, operative word. There are free materials, but you just need to, cite or do proper
Mm.
attribution. And there are a lot of
Mm-mm.
developers who are very willing
Mm-mm.
to share materials.
Mm-mm.
And I
Mm-mm.
think we are clarifying this because recently in the Philippines, copyright issues, copyright infringement on books. We have friends in the publishing. Of course, we love our publishing companies. We love our
Oo.
authors. They've worked hard for this, and you've
Mm-mm.
written also some books. You've
Mm.
written also some journals, and while we're not saying that we want to share, but for copyright with materials that have copyrights, we
Mm.
need to properly respect them because in the end
Mm-mm.
those are intellectual, they belong to
Mm.
intellectual properties of
Mm.
the
Mm.
developers and authors.
Mm.
So thank you, you've done a very good clarification on that.
Oo.
uh
Ah, ah, Jim, ang stand ko dyan, I always tell my students in all the training, whether it's in public domain or Creative Commons license, the sure way to do this is attribution. You need to reference whoever is the owner, whoever is, the distributor of the open educational resource. This is also, respecting what they have, worked hard for and made available for everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm sure whether it's in the public domain, there are some sort of ownership because it resides on a particular website or web page or academic institution portal. So I think referencing should also be observed, as well as in the Creative Commons licenses. So parang giving due respect to
Yeah.
those who have worked labor hard in order to provide us with open resource.
And Dr. Pitagan, I think even in academic, in like
Mm-mm.
in the interest of research, I mean,
Mm-mm.
it's good to know where the idea came from, even if
Mm-mm.
it's free, so that we can trace. Like, if there are things to
Mm-mm.
be corrected, if there is a discussion that needs to be done,
Mm-mm.
I think
Mm-mm.
it really boils down really to proper attribution. It's a sign of respect, and of course, in the person of
Mm-mm.
academic,
Mm-mm.
academic research, academic excellence. So wonderful thoughts. Now let's bring in the idea of remote learning or distance education.
Mm-mm.
Why is it that when we look for distance education, it's as if they're
Mm-mm.
always in the same area? Distance education or
Mm-mm.
remote learning, inclusive education, and then you
Mm-mm.
have OER, right?
Mm-mm.
Why is this so?
Why is this so? The idea of remote learning, the idea of distance learning is utilization the full gamut of technology to reach everyone for inclusive education or at least to continue education during this pandemic. Um, why is this so? Because OER also is in the tenets of inclusive education. Remember that before the pandemic, we are always pushing the use of technology for education because we want everyone to be on board with the educational process, practices, assessment, etc., etc. And this is the same tenets as open educational resource. That everything that we do in terms of integrating technology, may that technology be blended offline, online, okay, may it be the use of mass media resources, the basic tenets would always be for everyone, education for all. And this is also what OER is pushing. That is why when we talk of distance education, when we talk of remote learning, when we talk of open and distance learning, it is the resource for that learning should always be open educational resource because this is also free and open. So you could just imagine if you're going to, say, for example, offer a massive online course, a MOOC, and then the resources that you're going to use are proprietary or copyrighted. So no, maybe there would be some hardship in the access of those information. So if you're going to use, I always say that this should be the first parang line of defense. This should be the priority of all the schools is to come up with their own OER portal. Okay, so teachers would need to be trained on what is OER and how to curate content and in turn access resources and make their own OER portal. As you mentioned, diba, Xavier also has your own OER portal, UPOU. I think Diliman also has, Simeo would have their own OER. NISMED would have their also OER portals, UPIDTC, UPDILC, they have their own portal. De La Salle. Now in NTC, we're working on uh, coming up with our own NTC portal. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the resources in that portal are uh, done by NTC faculty or NTC personnel. What we're trying to do is to create portal or to create OER, a collection of all OER pertinent to the programs that we are offering. We have K to 12, so we are also using a lot of Depth Commons, a lot of PBS, a lot of MIT, a lot of other international OER portals. But at least if our teachers were told during the OER training, we have an OER training in NTC where we invited most of the faculty to attend the training. This is the analysis, design, implementation, and evaluation of open educational content for teachers. At least the faculty were informed that if you need resources that are free, that are open, that are OER, you go to this portal. So they don't need to, to go to a larger internet base, but go to that, to that portal where we define what the OER is and what corresponding lessons, materials could be found in that corresponding website. So I think all educational institutions, may it be K-12 or higher educational institutions, should have their own OER portal, because where every HEI would have their niche, but they would have their own distinctive programs.
Dr. Pitagan, you mentioned about curation. Like a
Mm-mm.
lot, if we want to build our portal for OERs, I think it's very important that I think the creation is a work of the community, a collaboration of
Mm-mm.
the community, because not
Yes.
not a single person would be able to do that. And of course, you want to
Mm.
explore a lot of resources.
Mm-mm.
Curation. What are your tips for teachers so that I know I've been really telling this as we transition to distance education. You
Oo.
don't be a content dumper. Diba?
Oo.
I mean, like, you will encounter them even in face-to-face classes. You have
Mm-mm.
people who would dump content, make you read
Mm-mm.
articles, and then in the end, in
Mm-mm.
that article, you only need the abstract or the conclusion, right? So
Yes.
to understand what they want to happen there. But my
Mm-mm.
question is, right now, we don't want to be content dumpers, but we
Mm-mm.
want to be content curators and the best content
Yes.
creators. What are your tips? Maybe three tips
Okay.
that you can give to our
3 tips.
educator, or no pressure. what are your best tips so that
Ako
teachers
muna.
would be able to understand what it means to curate?
Okay. Ako muna, I want to give my thoughts on content. Kasi this is the Philippine education has been content driven. Even if we're saying it's competency, skills, etc., etc. But right now, because of the pandemic, we really need to look into how we are delivering learning activities. Even the Department of Education has reviewed the K-12, and 60% of the competencies were, subsumed, deleted to power competencies. Diba? From around 15,000, we have now 5,000. So 60% na yung nawala. So ibig sabihin noon talaga, there are a lot of contents, quote unquote, that could be subsumed to other contents and to other activities. Instead of content, I want in the curation of OER, number one would be know your objectives. Okay, know your lesson. And knowing your lesson is knowing the competencies and knowing the learning experience that you're going to provide. Okay? Yung content hindi natin tinatanggal. But what corresponding learning experience? Do you want it to be interactive? You want it to be simulation? You want it to be discussion? You want it to be collaborative? You want it to be creative? So know first your learning experience. Know first your content. Know first your learning objective. Okay, so that's number one. You have to have a full grasp of what you want to do inside your online learning activities. Okay. Number two, knowing your content, knowing your learning experience, know now the best resource that you could get in order to deliver that. Say, for example, if you're teaching language, what would be the best OER? It would be an audio material, because an audio material, would have the full gamut of pronunciation, diction, stress, etc., etc. If you want to teach, say, for example, body parts, what would be the best open educational resource. It could be people media because it's real life, and at the same time, it has the full gamut of your resource that you are needing. So number one, you have to know your objective. Number two, you have to know the most effective type of OER for that learning content, for that learning competencies. And number three, this would come, the technical parts. You look at the audios, you look at the visuals, you could look at the transition, and more importantly, you look at the content of the material itself. It is valid, is it reliable? And you look at the delivery. Is it effective? It is efficient. So that's, I think, the three most basic, curation criteria that every teacher should look into an open educational resource. Doon sa technical, you could also look at the type of licenses. Is it CCDY, CCNA? It resides on the public domain or an OER created common portal? So yun, kasama lahat yung technical aspects, pedagogy, and instructional design doon sa number 3 or kahit number 4 yung instructional design. Yes.
Dr. Pitagan, I'm very interested with what you've mentioned, and I want to push this further. I think I'm very open that it's my agenda. I think whatever technology tool,
Mm.
OER, I think it should always be anchored on what we want to happen in the classroom.
Mm-mm.
Whether it's
Mm-mm.
we call it an objective, a learning
Mm.
experience outcome.
Mm-mm.
I think that's the danger, or maybe a point of
Mm.
improvement that in what we see right now. I think
Mm-mm.
what's happening right now is, did you do this? Do you have this? Give it to us.
Mm-mm.
We will curate and
Mm-mm.
compile them. I mean, like,
Mm-mm.
and then you categorize them and things like that. I
Mm-mm.
mean, that helps because you have now a
Ah,
wide array of materials.
available.
But in the end, we need to tell teachers that you don't just download this. I think the
Yes.
consumption, the use of OERs
Mm-mm.
even needs to be, I know, teachers need to be trained. It's not just
Mm-mm.
simply passing, I give this to you because
Mm-mm. You.
I made this. Um,
Mm.
Quality assurance. Can you tell us something about the importance of quality assurance also?
Okay. Yung quality assurance of OER would boil down to the institutional objectives. Okay. So what your institution gave you as in terms of the quality of resources that you're going to use for your educational activities. Okay. Um, yung quality of the OER itself would boil down on number one, yung content, as I've mentioned. The content has to be very, very valid. It has to be very, very reliable. If you're going to use any of the OER, make sure that the teacher has perused the content himself or herself. If it's a video material, make sure that the teacher were able to go through the whole multimedia from 0 to 30 minutes or to 10 minutes. Don't just not, this is very good, and then you stop and then you show it. There could be some alterations along the way. So that's number one. There should be very, very valid content, very, very reliable. And I said mention yung design elements of it should be age appropriate. Diba? It should be age appropriate. So if you're using it for kindergarten or for LM1 or LM2 or even in junior high school, senior, or even in HEI, the OER itself should be age appropriate. Number 3 would be the design elements, the layout and design, the use of white spaces, the use of voiceover. As I've mentioned, there could be tenets of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And number 3 would be yung instructional design. I think this is what you're mentioning right now. This is the most crucial, diba? Parang you curate content based on the design of your instruction. Okay? You don't evolve content in terms of a resource. Ibig sabihin, may maganda akong nakitang multimedia, and that doon ka magde-design ng course para magamit mo yung multimedia na yun. Hindi pwede yun. Kailangan you focus on your learning objectives. Jim, ito yung basic gusto lang ko sabihin. Doon sa nag-migrate, no? If we're going to migrate to online learning, to remote learning, even to distance education, whether it's blended, we cannot simply migrate what we're doing in face-to-face traditional and migrate it into online learning. It will not work. Kung sa traditional, sasabihin natin, I check attendance. So pagdating ng synchronous, mag-check ka rin ng attendance. Doon sa face-to-face, I lecture 30 minutes. Pagdating ng synchronous like this, magle-lecture din ako ng 30 minutes. Diba? Sa face-to-face, I do graded quiz. Pagdating sa online, you do also graded quiz. It will not work. Remember that our students, they are tech-savvy, they are media-savvy. Nilagay mo sila sa computer, sa harap ng tablets, or any monitor, and you want them just to sit and watch you for 1 hour, it will not work. So I think, and it's the same with open educational resource. You really have to deliberately integrate it into your lesson activities. Open na nga siya. So there are a wealth of available resources across different levels, across different subjects. But the teachers would have to have that, that wealth of knowledge, how to harness the power of OER in the most effective way para you heighten learning. The presence of games, game-based learning, the presence of, say, for example, Kahoot or some other free app for game-based learning, they would guarantee interaction, they would guarantee engagement, but would they guarantee learning? Diba? It could serve as a distraction. Diba? That's why an OER needs to be, sabi nga ni Jim kanina, process. If it's game-based, after every game in Kahoot, after they are very excited ang bata, you get the leaderboard, but you get to discuss before you proceed to question number 2. You get to discuss why this is the answer to that question and why the others are not the answer. And then you solicit also feedback before you proceed to question number 2. You process the resource.
All right. Wonderful. And I love that I was supposed to ask you about your thoughts on distance education and maybe your tips right now, but you've already gone to that part. And thank you so much. I think I would really, really agree with you. The main idea is, I think we're doing these things for the first time, but what we want to do is that we be open, we be flexible. That's what we're telling ourselves to whatever kind of new learnings that we have right now. So on behalf of every listener and viewer that we have right now and continue to have, thank you, Dr. Pitagan. I think this has been a very wonderful introduction. It's not just any introduction anymore because you also shared, based on your experiences and expertise, what it means to curate, what are the things that we need to understand and remember when we're creating or even consuming using open education resources. So thank you so much. I think this has been a very well-packed discussion, and again, thank you, and we hope to have you in one of our live sessions on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you so much, Dr. Pitagan.
Thank you also, Jim, for having me this morning, and I hope that our listeners have, listener and viewers, listeners and viewers would have to learn a thing or two about open educational resource, and I hope all of you would, promulgate the use of OER in Philippine education.
All right, and that's coming from our dear Dr. Pitagan. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pitagan. We continue to pray for everyone's safety and good health at this time of the pandemic.
Amen.
We keep everyone in our hearts. We remember you. We keep you in our thoughts also. So take care, and we hope to see you in our next episode. And don't forget to subscribe and tune in to our weekly Empower Ed sessions on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Ingat, ingat, ingat.